What if I told you the most intense romance in 1923 didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling? That the fiery chemistry between Spencer and Alexandra wasn't just acting, but something very real happening behind the scenes? In this exclusive deep dive, we're unpacking Brandon Sleaner and Julia Schlepfer's off-screen connection, the moments that sparked it, and how their bond changed everything on set. From flirty downtime to powerful scene work, this isn't just about what happened on screen. It's about what happens when the director yells, "Cut." Let's dive in when Taylor Sheridan cast Brandon Sleaner and Julia Schlepfer as Spencer Dutton. And Alexandra, even he didn't know he was about to capture something real, something he couldn't write into a script. From the moment they met, there was an energy between Brandon and Julia that no one could ignore. It wasn't just acting, crew members noticed it immediately. The way they looked at each other during breaks, the way their conversations kept going. Long after a scene had ended, it was different. It was real. Brandon, known for being reserved and deeply professional, suddenly seemed lighter, happier whenever Julia was around. And Julia, always bright and full of life, seemed to find a deeper calmness in Brandon's presence. It didn't take long for whispers to start spreading across the 1923 set. Was it possible that Spencer and Alexandra's love story had jumped off the script pages and into reality? At first they tried to keep it quiet. After all, the stakes were high. This wasn't just any project. 1923 was a monster hit for the Yellowstone universe, and everyone knew that on-set romances could get messy fast. But no matter how careful Brandon and Julia were, real emotion has a way of slipping through the cracks. Small things gave them away. They started arriving to set earlier together. They stayed late together. They laughed at inside jokes no one else understood. Brandon, who usually kept to himself during downtime, suddenly seemed drawn to Julia like gravity pulling planets together. And Julia, who had a reputation for being endlessly professional, was suddenly caught looking at Brandon with something far more powerful than just friendship. People on set pretended not to notice, but everyone did. How could they not? The chemistry between them was so strong it practically charged the air. It made their scenes electric. It made the show better. But behind the scenes, a deeper question was starting to form. Was this just temporary, just two actors caught up in the emotions of their characters? Or was something real building between them? The pressure only grew. As Spencer and Alexandra's love story on screen became more intense, so did Brandon and Julia's connection off screen. Every kiss they filmed, every moment of intimacy they portrayed seemed to bleed into real life. Some say the emotional scenes they shared were even harder to film because they weren't pretending anymore. They were feeling it for real. And that terrified them. Brandon, who had spent years protecting his private life, knew that falling for a co-star could put everything at risk. Julia, who had always dreamed of building a career on her own merit, knew that being linked to Brandon could change everything, not just for the show, but for her future. But the heart doesn't care about timing. It doesn't care about consequences. And as filming went on, it became clear to everyone watching something incredible was happening between them. Still, they tried to deny it. They tried to convince themselves that it was just the intensity of 1923, just the pressure of long days, emotional scenes, and living together on location. After all, they were thousands of miles away from home, thrown into an intense, isolated bubble where emotions ran high. Maybe they thought once filming ended, the feelings would fade. Maybe it was just a beautiful illusion. But deep down, neither Brandon nor Julia truly believed that. Because when they looked into each other's eyes, even when the cameras weren't, rolling, it was real. And real love, the kind that sneaks up on you when you least expect it, doesn't just disappear when the lights go out. It lingers. It grows. And no matter how much they tried to stay professional, no matter how much they tried to hide it, the truth was becoming undeniable. Spencer and Alexandra might have been a love story written by Taylor Sheridan, but Brandon and Julia, they were writing their own. What happened next would shock even the closest members of the 1923 crew. Because just as the season wrapped when most people expected the cast to drift apart and move on to new projects, Brandon and Julia did something nobody saw coming. Instead of saying goodbye, they chose to stay close. Very close. Sources reveal that even after filming ended, they were seen traveling together, staying in the same cities, and even visiting each other's families. They weren't just co-stars anymore. They weren't just friends. Something deeper had taken root. And for the first time, Brandon Sklenar, the famously private-guarded actor, wasn't hiding it anymore. Neither was Julia. In a world where Hollywood romances are often fake temporary and built on publicity, this one felt different. This one felt real. And as the months passed, their bond only seemed to grow stronger. But even as their connection deepened, Brandon and Julia faced a huge, terrifying question. Could their love survive once the world found out? Could they protect something so fragile, so real, from the chaos of fame, gossip, and public attention? Could a love born in the fake world of television survive in the brutal real world beyond it? As they stepped into the unknown hand in hand, everything they had built both on and off screen hung in the balance. And the story of Spencer and Alexandra, the story that captured millions of hearts, suddenly felt like just the beginning. Once the cameras stopped rolling and the lights dimmed, that's when the real story began. Away from the polished world of production, Brandon Sklenar and Julia Schlepfer were navigating something delicate, something too fragile to speak out loud. On set, they were Spencer and Alexandra lovers fighting against all odds. But when filming, wrapped for the day, they were just two people trying to figure out what was happening between them. And it wasn't easy. The world of 1923 was intense. The pressure was high. Taylor Sheridan's sets are known for their grit and authenticity. He pushes his cast to the edge emotionally, physically, even spiritually. For Brandon and Julia, that emotional toll created something unique. They leaned on each other in ways no one else could understand. They had both given so much of themselves to these roles, and now it was impossible to tell where the acting ended. And the truth began. It started subtly. Crew members noticed Brandon waiting for Julia after her scenes. Julia lingering near Brandon between takes. They weren't overly affectionate, but there was a kind of gravity between them. Like they were pulled toward each other and didn't know how to stop it. One crew member described it as unspoken, but undeniable. They didn't flirt in front of others, and they didn't share anything publicly. But every look between them felt loaded with emotion, especially during quiet moments. One day when the crew was stuck in a long reset between takes, Brandon and Julia sat together on a sand dune, completely silent for almost an hour. No phones, no distractions, just two people who didn't need words to say what they were feeling. That silence said everything. And when the days stretched into nights and the cast retreated to their lodgings, Brandon and Julia were often seen heading off in the same direction. Not always together, not always holding hands, but close always. Close the makeup artist on set let slip once that Julia would come in early just to sit in Brandon's trailer before filming. Not to rehearse, just to be there, to talk, to laugh, to exist in each other's space. Something about it felt different. Quiet, sacred. It wasn't long before rumors began to swirl, not among fans, but within the cast itself. Some actors speculated it was a short-term thing, a typical on-set fling, but others weren't so sure. Their bond wasn't loud or dramatic. It was grounded, real. There were no games, no public stunts. Just two people growing closer by the day, tied together by a story that was both fictional and somehow deeply personal. During press tours, they rarely sat far from each other. Julia often looked to Brandon when she answered emotional questions, and he in turn would glance at her during interviews, like making sure she was okay, like making sure she knew she wasn't alone in it. The wild part? They never confirmed anything. Even now, there were no Instagram posts, no red carpet kisses, no public declarations. But maybe that's what made it more real. Not everything has to be broadcast. Not every love story is made for the spotlight. Some are born in the quiet, in the in-between moments. And for Brandon and Julia, that privacy became their protection. They didn't need to prove anything to the world. They were just living it day by day, scene by scene, breath by breath, and yet even in their silence, the truth leaked through. The emotional weight in their final scenes together wasn't just acting. It was something more, something raw. When Alexandra cries out for Spencer in that final port scene, when Spencer looks back with eyes filled with love and regret, fans felt it. And maybe that's why those moments still haunt us. Because somewhere deep down, we all knew this wasn't just storytelling. This was real, and what happened behind closed doors may have been quiet, but it was also unforgettable. But love, especially the kind you try to hide, doesn't stay a secret forever. The more Brandon and Julia tried to protect what they had, the more the pressure around them grew. The 1923 set was no longer just about Cowboys' family legacies and the Dutton name. It became a battlefield of whispers and quiet stares. Some crew members were supportive, even protective. Others weren't so kind. Rumors began to spread. Jealousy, competition, suspicion. People questioned whether their chemistry on-screen was too real, whether it was overshadowing other cast members, whether Julia was getting special treatment. It wasn't true. But in an environment built on illusion and intensity, perception became everything. And perception was turning dangerous. One moment stood out, a confrontation behind the scenes. It wasn't loud, and it wasn't violent, but it changed everything. According to sources close to production, a senior crew member pulled Brandon aside and warned him. "Keep it professional," they said. "Don't risk everything for a fling." That word, fling, cut deep. Because by then this wasn't casual. It wasn't temporary. Brandon had told a friend that Julia felt like home. Julia had whispered to a close confidant that Brandon understood her in ways no one else did. This was not just a crush between scenes. It was real. And the thought of losing it made everything else fade. But the pressure to choose between career and connection secrecy and truth was starting to build like a storm over Montana. And then the real blow came. Julia received a call from her agent. A new role, a major one. But it meant leaving Montana for months. It meant walking away from 1923, possibly forever. And it meant leaving Brandon behind. When she told him, he didn't speak. Not at first. He just looked at her like time had stopped. Julia later told a friend, "I thought he'd tell me to stay. I wanted him to say, 'Don't go,' but he didn't. Instead, he said, 'You have to do this. I'll be here.'" But the look in his eyes betrayed the words, because deep down, he knew things would never be the same. The weeks that followed were quiet, tense, filled with missed calls, unread texts, and the sound of footsteps that never turned back. Julia left. Brandon stayed. And for the first time since their connection sparked on that train scene, they were apart. Fans noticed something was different. The spark in Brandon's interviews dimmed. Julia avoided questions about the show. Their social media went silent. And yet, neither unfollowed the other. Neither deleted the blurry, half-lit photos they'd taken during golden hour on set. The ones they never posted publicly. The ones that said more than 1,000 words. Months passed. Montana turned cold, and the set of 1923 moved on. New episodes were filmed, new storylines developed, and the Dutton legacy pushed forward. But behind the scenes, the absence of Julia Schlepfer was like a missing puzzle piece that couldn't be ignored. Brandon Sklenar still showed up every day, still delivered powerful performances, still smiled for the cameras, but something had shifted. The weight of what he was holding back was visible if you looked closely enough. Not in his words, but in his silences. In the way he'd glance toward the horizon between takes, as if searching for something or someone just out of reach. And in those quiet moments, the people who knew him best saw it. Brandon hadn't moved on. Not even close. Julia was hundreds of miles away working on a new project in New York. The bright lights, the interviews, the late-night shoots, it should have been a dream. But it didn't feel like one. In private, she admitted to friends that the city felt too loud, too fast. "It's like I'm surrounded by people, but I've never felt more alone," she said once during a quiet dinner after filming. And the truth was, she missed the simplicity of Montana, the quiet of the plains, the safety of that set. But more than anything, she missed Brandon. They tried to keep in touch. At first, there were long phone calls after midnight, soft laughter, whispered memories, the kind of conversations you don't forget. Brandon would describe the new scenes, how the character of Spencer was evolving. Julia would talk about her character's costume fittings, the strange thrill of playing someone so different from Alexandra. They made promises. "We'll find our way back. Just hold on a little longer." But the calls grew shorter. The schedules got tighter. Sometimes days would pass without a word. Then weeks, not because they didn't care, but because real life has a way of stealing time right out from under you. And when love isn't nurtured, even the strongest bond can start to crack. The media didn't help. With Julia's rising fame, paparazzi started following her. She was seen with a co-star, just walking, just talking. But that was all it took for the headlines to spiral. New romance for Julia? Brandon who? And though Julia laughed it off in interviews, Brandon saw the photos. He never said anything publicly. But that same night, he deleted a saved photo on his phone, the one of Julia holding a coffee cup smiling at him on a cold morning in Montana. He couldn't look at it anymore, but the universe wasn't done with them yet. Just when it seemed like their story had quietly ended, fate threw them back into the same orbit. A special press event for 1923, the entire main cast invited. Juliet wasn't supposed to attend. She had declined, but days before the event, she changed her mind. No one knew why. Maybe it was a sign. Maybe it was unfinished business. Or maybe she just missed him. When she walked into the room, the air changed. Brandon saw her before anyone else did. He didn't move. For a moment, neither of them did. But their eyes locked, and suddenly it wasn't a press room anymore. It was that train ride all over again. That first spark, that impossible connection. They didn't speak right away, not in front of everyone. But later, when the cameras were gone and the lights dimmed, they found each other in a quiet hallway. Witnesses say they didn't even talk for the first few seconds. They just stood there, breathing, staring, remembering. And then came the words. Simple, honest. "I missed you," Julia said. "I never stopped," Brandon replied. There was no dramatic kiss, no grand announcement. But something changed that night. The distance between them wasn't just physical, it had become emotional. And now, piece by piece, they were closing that gap, slowly, carefully, with the kind of tenderness that only comes after surviving a storm. The next day, they sat side by side during interviews. Their body language said it all. Shoulders leaning closer, shared smiles, stolen glances. The press noticed, fans noticed, something had shifted. The silence between them wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, like the pause before a song begins. Again, their story wasn't over. Not yet. They never meant for this to happen. Brandon Sklenar and Julia Schleipfer came to the set of 1923 as professionals, both laser-focused on building the love story of Spencer and Alexandra. What they didn't realize was that the real love story wasn't the one they were acting. It was the one happening behind the scenes, slowly unfolding between them when no one was looking. And now, after months of silence, longing, and emotional distance, they were back in each other's lives. But this time, something was different. This time, they weren't pretending. Sources close to the actors say that after the press reunion, things began moving quietly but steadily. No flashy announcements, no Instagram posts or tabloid teasers, just long conversations in private, quiet walks after long days, and the kind of vulnerability that only comes when two people have already lost each other once. They both knew the risks. Hollywood isn't kind to real love, the pressure, the rumors, the distance. It's enough to break even the strongest bond. But Brandon and Julia had already faced the storm, and now they were standing in the aftermath, hand in hand, daring to rebuild. Julia returned to Montana briefly, not for filming, but for herself. She stayed at a quiet cabin outside of town, far from the lights and noise. Brandon visited her, there, away from the set, away from everything that had kept them apart. And in those still, snow-covered mornings, they talked, really talked, about the pressure, the fear, the feeling of falling for someone when the world is watching. Julia admitted she'd tried to let go, that she'd told herself it was just a fling, just an on-set bond, but deep down, she always knew better. Brandon told her he couldn't watch 1923 reruns without feeling like something had been left unfinished, that no matter how far Spencer Dutton traveled, his heart always stayed with Alexandra. And maybe, just maybe, the same was true for him. They began writing letters to each other. Yes, actual letters. Old-fashioned and handwritten. Julia said it helped her slow down, helped her say the things she couldn't in texts or phone calls. Brandon responded with pages of thoughts, memories, hopes. In one letter, he wrote, "We never auditioned for this. There was no script. But somehow we keep finding each other again and again. That has to mean something." Their friends began to see the difference. Brandon, who had grown quieter in recent months, suddenly seemed lighter. Julia, often guarded during interviews, now carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. Even the 1923 crew, seasoned professionals who'd seen hundreds of on-screen romances, couldn't help but whisper, this one might be real. Fans, too, noticed the change. While neither actor confirmed the rumors publicly, sharp-eyed viewers picked up on small but telling clues. A shared look during a panel. The way Julia's hand brushed Brandon's arm almost unconsciously. A subtle smile he gave her after she answered a question. None of it was planned, but all of it felt like a story still being written. And yet, they were careful, because they knew how quickly Hollywood could turn something genuine into something performative. They knew how fast the magic could disappear once it became spectacle, so they protected what they had, kept it quiet, sacred. Their love wasn't for show. It wasn't for headlines. It was theirs, private, real.